They called it a celebration, but it never felt like one for me. When I received the invitation to my sister Ava's baby shower, I already sensed it wasn't going to be like the fairy tale family moments I had scrolled past on social media. The card had gold trim, an embossed rattle, and the words, "Honoring Ava and our miracle baby." My name was nowhere on it, not even under the usual polite "hosted by." Still, I RSVP'd yes, because that's what I always did. Show up, be invisible, smile anyway. The truth is, I wasn't just forgotten. I was never even considered. When I arrived at the venue, a luxury garden hotel my parents had booked with a private veranda draped in pink and white chiffon, I wasn't greeted like a guest. My mother barely acknowledged me. My father gestured toward the kitchen and said, "The catering crew needs help plating the mini quiches." I blinked, laughed nervously, assuming he was joking. He wasn't. Ava, glowing in designer maternity couture, raised a brow and offered a tight smile. "You don't mind helping out, do you?" She purred sweetly, just loud enough for her circle of friends to hear. "You're so good at staying in the background." Her friends giggled, clinking glasses filled with imported elderflower spritzers. One of them even whispered, "Oh, is she the help?" I froze, tray in hand, realizing with full clarity that I had been brought here not as family, but as staff. I walked between rows of seated guests, balancing drinks, overhearing relatives I hadn't seen in years, muttering, "Is she working here now?" As if I had simply dissolved into a lesser version of myself while they all carried on celebrating. I remembered every childhood moment I had swallowed. How Ava always got the new clothes, the last slice of cake, the solo in the school recital. How my parents would always say, "Let Ava shine," every time I raised my hand or asked to be heard. I remembered the birthdays where I got socks while Ava got a new phone, the family portraits where I was always standing at the edge. The baby shower was just the grand finale of a lifetime of being treated as an accessory in my own family's life. But this time, something inside me broke free. I walked out the back door, leaving the tray on a table like a dropped mic. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't cry. I left in silence. But my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. When I got home, I opened the old storage bin tucked away in my closet, the one my parents never knew I had kept. Inside was a manila folder. Inside that folder was my birth certificate. I had found it years ago, during one of my mother's spring cleaning purges, buried under old tax files. It had a single word stamped in red ink across the bottom: adopted. They never spoke of it. They never admitted it. They pretended I was one of them, just enough to keep up appearances. But deep down, I knew they never saw me as their own. That night, I crossed the word out with thick black ink and wrote underneath, "Family is earned, not assigned." The next morning, I made 50 clean copies and slid them into pink envelopes with a handwritten message. "I may have been adopted, but you abandoned me. Here's to clarity." Every person who had been at that baby shower got one delivered to their mailbox. The fallout started before noon. My aunt called me first, her voice dripping with a mix of concern and gossip-fueled curiosity. "Sweetheart, is it true?" she asked, as if the copy in her hand could have been forged. I didn't explain. I simply said, "It's all there in black and white," and hung up. Within hours, I was trending in the family group chats I had never been part of. Screenshots circulated, and so did whispers. Ava, of course, was furious. She called me 3 times, each call angrier than the last. On the 4th, I picked up. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed. "You're ruining my moment." I almost laughed. "Your moment? You made me the waiter at your baby shower." "Oh, please, stop acting like the victim," she snapped. "You're always so dramatic, we didn't know where else to put you. You're not exactly guest material." That sentence right there, that was the match to the gasoline I had been soaking in for 25 years. I didn't respond with anger. I responded with silence. the kind that rattles even the most arrogant souls. And I hung up. But I wasn't done. I didn't just want them to feel embarrassed. I wanted them to reflect. So I created a post. Simple, clear, and deadly honest. I uploaded a picture of my birth certificate with the word adopted, blacked out, and underneath it I wrote, "Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the one that raises you, and sometimes the ones that raise you never truly accept you. This is me, reclaiming my place, my worth, and my voice." The post blew up. Friends I hadn't heard from in years messaged me. Even strangers shared their stories. One woman wrote, "Thank you for saying what so many of us are afraid to admit. We are treated like shadows in our own homes." And then came the unexpected twist. A journalist from a women's empowerment magazine reached out. She'd seen the post and wanted to feature my story. I hesitated, but then I thought, why not? For once, I could speak without being shushed or shamed. I could tell the truth. The article went viral, not because I was famous, but because I was honest, raw, unapologetic. And suddenly, I wasn't just the girl who carried drinks at her sister's party. I was a symbol for every daughter, every outcast, every invisible one, told to sit at the kids' table forever. And just when Ava thought it was all dying down, I delivered the final blow. The final blow came wrapped in gold foil and hand-delivered to the same luxury venue where Ava's baby shower had taken place. But this time, it wasn't a tray of finger foods I was carrying. It was power. Ava had booked the venue months ago for her upcoming maternity photo shoot and family brunch. She'd envisioned it as a second crown on her baby shower throne. Flowers, a violinist, a mommy and me banner made of imported silk. What she didn't know was that just days before her event, I bought the entire booking out from under her. How? That magazine feature didn't just earn me sympathy. It brought in sponsorship deals. Brands wanted to partner with the adopted girl who exposed a toxic family with a birth certificate. It paid more than enough to buy out the venue, rent the staff, and host something else entirely. When Ava arrived with her stylist and photographer, they were met by a locked gate and a sign. "Private event, celebration of found family. All are welcome, except those who mocked." She stood outside fuming, calling every number she could find. The venue manager politely explained, "I'm sorry, Ms. Bennett. Your reservation was canceled, the client paid double, and left specific instructions not to allow in anyone who mocked a guest last time." She knew. And I knew she knew. The celebration inside wasn't petty. It was peaceful. I invited foster mothers, social workers, girls from group homes, even one of my high school teachers who once slipped me a sandwich when I couldn't afford lunch. We danced, laughed, and told stories not of pain, but of power. At one point, I walked outside just to breathe. And there Ava was, standing by her car, seething, with her mother on the phone demanding, "How could she do this to us?" I wanted to say, "You did it to yourselves," but I didn't. I simply nodded and walked back inside. That silence, it was the loudest revenge I could ever serve. And the envelope? I sent one last thing the next day. A copy of my revised birth certificate. Not the legal kind, but one I had printed for myself. Where adopted once sat, now it read, "Daughter of no one, raised by pain, crowned by her own strength." Underneath it, one handwritten sentence. "You made me a servant at your party. I made myself the guest of honor in my own life." The aftermath settled like dust, but not the kind that fades. It lingered in the air like smoke after a house fire. My parents didn't call. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to check in, not even out of guilt. Their silence screamed louder than any confrontation ever could. Ava, ever the performer, took to Instagram almost immediately, posting a photo of a half-deflated balloon bouquet from the failed baby brunch with the caption, "We rise above the drama. My child will only know peace." What followed was a flood of likes, but this time, also a wave of reckoning. Someone had shared the magazine article under her post, and before she could delete it, dozens of comments poured in. "This your sister you humiliated? Wow, I hope your kid doesn't grow up learning this kind of cruelty." Imagine making your own blood serve you at a party and still playing the victim. Ava tried to clap back, calling me jealous and unstable, but the internet wasn't buying it. For once, she wasn't worshipped. She was questioned, and it broke the illusion she had spent years crafting, that she was the golden girl, the flawless one, the favorite for good reason. Now people saw the cracks in her crown, and they weren't pretty. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The truth was already out there, and this time I wasn't the one bleeding for it. Meanwhile, I was building something bigger, a life that didn't require their approval. One of the mentorship programs that had read the article reached out. They wanted me to speak to young women aging out of the foster system. At first, I hesitated. What did I have to say that mattered? But then I remembered the years I'd spent being treated like an outsider in my own family. And suddenly I had everything to say. I told those girls, "Your worth isn't tied to the table they refuse to let you sit at. Build your own." I poured myself into the work, helped organize events, designed care packages. I even started writing again. Essays, stories, small memoir pieces. Healing leaked out of my fingers and onto the page, one paragraph at a time.
I got my own apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No one told me what to wear. No one criticized my meals. I painted the walls with soft pinks and warm browns, colors I was never allowed to choose growing up. In the corner of the living room, I framed my reprinted birth certificate, the one that read, "Daughter of her own destiny." But just when I thought the past was behind me, the text came in like a rusted knife. "Your father's sick. We need help. Ava can't do it all." That was it. No, how are you? No, we're sorry. Just, we need. As if I were still a tool, a broom, a backup plan. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Not because I wanted to reply, but because I couldn't stop smiling. They still saw me as the invisible one. But what they didn't realize was, invisibility is a choice when you control the spotlight. I didn't answer the message that night, or the next, and yet the texts kept coming, this time from Ava. "It's Dad. He's not doing well. We're swamped. I know you're mad, but can you just show up?" That was rich. Now she needed me to just show up, like I hadn't spent my whole life being erased, while she basked in the spotlight. I wasn't being asked back out of love. I was being summoned out of convenience. I almost blocked her right then, but something stopped me. I wanted closure, but not the kind they expected. Not the kind that involves hugs and tears and false reconciliation. No, I wanted something colder, something undeniable, something that would remind them I wasn't their emotional servant anymore. So I showed up, but not with casseroles and comfort. I wore the same black dress I had been made to wear as staff at Ava's baby shower. Except this time, I paired it with red lipstick, sharp heels, and confidence they didn't recognize. Ava opened the door, clearly flustered, and her eyes scanned my outfit with confusion. You dressed up?" I smiled. "Well, I thought I'd look the part. Isn't this how you prefer to see me?" Inside, the house smelled of stale soup and tension. My father lay in a recliner, hooked to oxygen, frail, a shadow of the man who once told me to stay out of family photos so things look more balanced. He looked up at me and blinked slowly, confused, or ashamed, or both. My mother hovered nearby. "Thank you for coming. We've been stretched thin." I didn't sit. I didn't take off my coat. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope, cream-colored, sealed in wax. I handed it to my mother. She looked confused. "What is this?" "It's your surprise," I said calmly. "Since you like hosting parties with themes, I thought I'd bring one of my own." She opened it, Inside were two documents. A notarized letter from the local Women's Empowerment Center stating I had officially launched a program in my name. And a copy of a contract, a book deal. My memoir, Invisible Child, the daughter who refused to serve. Ava grabbed it and read out loud, stunned. National distribution, public speaking tour, dedicated to every girl who was told to serve when she should have been celebrated. Silence. Tension so thick you could butter toast with it. I leaned in just slightly. Oh, and Mom, check the last page. She did. And there it was, a scan of my real birth certificate, the one I had updated. And under the line where adopted had once been scribbled by my mother in bitter jest when I was little, I had drawn a single red line crossing it out. Beneath it, in fine cursive, born of strength, raised by herself. No one said anything, and for once, the silence didn't hurt, it healed. I stood up, turned toward the door, and said, I came, but I didn't come back. And I walked out. The drive home from that visit wasn't quiet. My heart wasn't thundering anymore, but my mind, oh, it was alive. For the first time, the power wasn't in their hands. It was in mine. They saw me not as the forgotten daughter, not as the obedient afterthought who showed up when summoned, but as the woman they never truly knew, the woman they underestimated into silence. When I got home, I sat in my small but bright living room, surrounded by soft music, warm light, and the calm that only comes from reclaiming your story. I looked at the copy of my book contract again, this time not just with pride, but with clarity. The publisher wanted the opening chapter to center around the baby shower. That single humiliating moment when my parents let Ava crown herself queen, while I was reduced to pouring drinks for guests who didn't even know I was her sister. That was the hook. That was the betrayal the world would read and recognize. As I stared at the title page, tears welled in my eyes. Not the broken kind, but the releasing kind. I was letting go of years, letting go of all the birthdays I spent waiting for them to remember, the missed recitals, the report cards they never looked at, the time I got accepted into the honors program and my mom asked, "Why are you trying to compete with Ava again?" It was all pouring out now, but it no longer consumed me. I was burning the old narrative, one chapter at a time. But then the doorbell rang. I froze. No one visited me unannounced. For a moment, I feared it was one of them. Maybe Ava again, desperate to salvage the image she was losing control over. Or maybe my mother, finally deciding to play the martyr. But when I opened the door, it was someone else. Someone I hadn't seen since high school. Olivia. We weren't close back then. She was a quiet girl, always sitting in the library while the Ava show ran wild in the hallways. But she had seen my article, then saw the early press for the book, and tracked me down. She hugged me, out of nowhere, a real one, not the kind I grew up faking in family pictures. I read every word, she whispered. You said what I never could. Turns out, Olivia had grown up in a similar home. Not the same story, but the same silence. The same hunger for validation from people too broken to give it. And just like that, something clicked in me. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. That weekend, we met with 2 more women, also from homes like ours. We formed a support circle, not just to talk, but to build something. A scholarship fund, named after girls like us who were told they didn't belong at the table. We called it the Red Line Foundation. The name, of course, was inspired by that red line I'd drawn through adopted on my birth certificate. We weren't waiting to be chosen anymore. We were creating our own rooms. By the time fall came around, the book had launched. It wasn't just selling, it was spreading. Teachers started assigning it in women's studies classes. Counselors quoted it. Estranged daughters sent me messages from across the world, thanking me for saying what they still couldn't. I got invited to speak at a national women's conference. And when I stepped onto that stage, no apron, no serving tray, no fake smile, I finally felt what real belonging meant. I wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. I was the spotlight, And still, a part of me wondered if they were watching, if Ava had seen the morning show interview, if my mother had heard the podcast where I read from the chapter called The Waiter in the Family. Did they regret it? Did they finally see what they'd lost? Maybe, but the best part, it didn't matter anymore. Winter rolled in with soft snow and loud silence from my family. The book kept gaining traction, reviews poured in, and I was being contacted by schools, nonprofits, even networks wanting to adapt it. But none of that compared to the email that landed in my inbox just after New Year's. It was from Ava. The subject line simply read, "Congratulations." The message was short. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she did at the baby shower. Just a tight, forced line that read, "Saw your book is doing well. Just remember, we're family. Don't let the public attention make you forget where you came from." I stared at it for a while, not angry, not surprised, just amused. Even now, with her facade crumbling, her pride bruised, she couldn't bring herself to say I was wrong. Instead, she cloaked her insecurity with backhanded reminders of the past, hoping I'd still feel small enough to crave her approval. But I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to my editor. We agreed it would be the perfect addition to the paperback edition's final chapter. A final glimpse of the entitlement I'd risen from. A silent mic drop to end the story. Then something else happened. At a book signing event a few weeks later, a woman approached me, older, maybe mid-50s, with tears in her eyes and a trembling hand holding my book. "I'm your aunt," she said softly. "Your mom's sister." I blinked. She told me she hadn't seen my mother in over 2 decades. Family disagreements. Pain swept under the rug. But she'd been watching from afar. She saw the article, read the book, and knew, without question, who I was. "I always wondered what happened to the little girl with the sad eyes at Christmas," she whispered. I broke. In a single moment, everything cracked open. The years of longing, of wondering if anyone in my family ever saw me for who I was, not who I wasn't. She hugged me, and it didn't feel like a stranger's touch. It felt like home, like a thread to the family I was meant to have. She said something that stayed with me. Sometimes family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shares your truth. And in that moment, I finally understood. I hadn't lost a family. I'd outgrown one.
The encounter with my aunt stirred something I didn't expect. For so long, I believed the entire family tree was rotten, not just the branches I'd grown up under. But now, I saw there were roots I never knew existed. Quiet, hidden roots that had been cut off by pride, jealousy, and long-forgotten family wars. She told me stories about my mother before she became the woman I knew. The cold matriarch who scoffed at emotion and weaponized comparison like it was love. Apparently, she wasn't always that way. Once she'd been tender, brave, even artistic. But somewhere along the way, after being passed over in their own family for prettier, more compliant siblings, she hardened. She made a vow to never be small again. And unfortunately, she thought being big meant shrinking others. I walked away from that conversation not with pity, but clarity. Cycles repeat when no one dares to break them. And I had broken ours. Days later, I got a message from a major talk show. They wanted me to come on and speak about the book, the movement, and the story behind the red-marked birth certificate that had gone viral. The producer said the segment had been approved for prime time. Live. I stood backstage on the day of filming, nerves buzzing beneath my skin. But not fear, anticipation, purpose. As the host introduced me, I stepped into the light with a calm I never knew I had. Dressed in my favorite tailored red suit, I looked like everything I had never been allowed to become under my parents' roof. I told the world my truth. I spoke of betrayal masked as tradition, of girls silenced at tables where they served but never spoke, of how even love can be weaponized when it's filtered through insecurity. And then I pulled out the infamous scanned image of my birth certificate, projected on a large screen behind me. The word adopted slashed through with a thick red line. The studio gasped. I explained what it meant. Not literally adopted, but emotionally orphaned. The child who watched her parents celebrate another sibling, while pretending she didn't exist. The daughter reduced to help, to background, to a footnote in someone else's milestone. And how I decided, that day at the baby shower, I was done. I ended my speech with a sentence that even surprised me when I heard myself say it. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is underline yourself in red. The applause that followed didn't just echo. It broke something. A chain. A myth. A silence I'd carried since childhood. And back home, while the world was talking about me, my parents were quiet. Not a text, not a call, not a letter. But I knew they saw it. Ava had deleted her social media days earlier. Their silence was louder than anything they could have said. It wasn't absence. It was shame, disguised as distance. But I didn't need their reaction anymore. I had thousands of others. Letters from women in foster care, girls whose moms called them not marriage material, boys who were told their sister was the golden child, even mothers who admitted, with guilt, that they saw themselves in my mother and wanted to change. That's when I knew. This wasn't just revenge. This was redemption. I hadn't just told my story. I had built a stage for others to finally tell theirs. Spring brought a strange kind of renewal. Not just the scent of blooming jasmine in the air or the warm sunlight pouring through my office window, but a soft shift inside me. A peace I hadn't known I was craving. After the talk show and the book's success, I had finally stopped waiting for applause from people who never clapped for me. Instead, I listened to the quiet validation of strangers who became family through truth. I'd been invited to speak at universities, women's shelters, and even correctional programs, anywhere people were trying to heal from invisible wounds. I walked into those rooms, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a voice. And in every tear-filled hug and trembling thank you whispered at the edge of a crowded hall, I felt my younger self being stitched back together. Slowly, patiently, proudly. Then one afternoon, a simple beige envelope arrived in my mailbox. No name, no stamp, no return address, just my first name in faint cursive. Inside was a single photo, a baby, me, being held by my mother. But not the version of her that haunted my childhood with sharp words and sharper looks. This mother was laughing, head tilted back, joy painted across her face. She looked young, happy, human. My hands trembled as I turned the photo over. Scrawled in faded ink were just 9 words. You were wanted, just not by the ones who raised you. I sat down on the kitchen floor, photo clutched against my chest, and cried. Not because I was broken, but because this truth was bigger than any lie I'd been told growing up. Bigger than you're not enough. Bigger than be useful or be invisible. It meant someone had known, someone had seen me. Later that night, I received the email from my father. The subject line read only, "If you'll read this." The message was short, hesitant, unlike the harsh man I remembered. I saw your interview. You looked strong, so much like your mother used to before everything hardened her. We didn't know how to love you. I think we didn't know how to love anyone. I'm sorry it took the whole world watching for me to realize what we lost. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk. For a long time, I stared at that email. My heart caught somewhere between fury and forgiveness. There was no grand confession, no tears, no acknowledgement of the years of damage. Just a crack, a flicker, a whisper of regret. And yet, I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would. I didn't feel rage either. I just felt complete. Because the truth was, I didn't need him to understand. I didn't need his version of closure. I had found mine. In every person who stood up after reading my words, in every message that began with "me too," and in every silent girl who realized she didn't need a seat at someone else's table, because she could build her own. Some families never say sorry. Some wounds never get stitched. But they don't have to. Because healing isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about resurrection. And I had come back from the dead version of me they buried in that baby shower, reborn in my own name, with my own voice, in red ink that refused to be ignored. The following winter, I stood outside the same banquet hall where the baby shower took place nearly 2 years ago. It looked the same: gold-trimmed windows, an arched entrance, and that same smug fountain they used to pose around like royalty. But this time, the building was under my name. I hadn't just bought it, I'd renamed it. The Red Room. A nod to the ink I once used to rewrite my story. The ink that turned rejection into redemption. Tonight, it hosted a charity gala I organized, raising funds for young women who had been silenced, overlooked, or discarded by the very people meant to protect them. The room was filled with warmth, laughter, and voices that mattered, voices that had once been shushed, stories that had once been buried. As the final speech ended and applause filled the room, I stepped outside for a moment of stillness. That's when I saw her, my sister, standing across the street in a long coat, her eyes darting from the entrance to the glowing marquee. She wasn't holding balloons or gifts this time, just a face full of disbelief. She didn't come in, she didn't wave, she just watched. And I watched her right back. Not with hate, not with pity, but with distance. The kind of distance that only healing can build, stronger than walls, wider than oceans. Because the truth is, I didn't cancel her wedding to get revenge. I didn't write a bestseller to shame them. I didn't rise to prove anyone wrong. I rose because they no longer got to define me. I rose because a girl once made to serve cake in silence now owned the building where her silence was born. I rose because sometimes the only closure you need is showing up for yourself when no one else ever did. And in that final moment, as I stepped back into the warmth of my hall, surrounded by women who saw me, not as adopted, not as extra, not as less than, but as a leader, I realized something I never thought I'd say. I was never the problem. I was just in the wrong room until I built my own. And now the door would always be open, but only to those who saw my worth before the world forced them to. Because some stories aren't meant to end with a happy family reunion. Some are meant to end with you becoming everything they said you couldn't. And that, in itself, is the loudest ending of all. And as the music swelled inside the ballroom, I let one last tear fall. Not for what I lost, but for the girl who finally found her voice. I didn't need them to say they were wrong. Their absence at my triumph was louder than any apology. In the silence they left behind, I built an empire of echoes that spoke only truth. I was never their shadow. I was my own light. And from that day forward, I stopped knocking on locked doors. I simply built palaces with no keys. Because queens don't beg for chairs. They build their own tables. And mine? It had a seat for every version of me they tried to erase.